This brought her big red mouth up level with his own, and very close, so he started kissing her. He knew from experience that women like very much to be kissed in this position, with their bodies held tight and their legs dangling in the air. So he went on doing it for quite a long time, and she wiggled her feet and made loud gulping noises down in her throat. Finally, the husband turned her round and began easing her gently through the open window into the dining room. At this point, a police patrol car came nosing silently along the street towards them. It stopped about 30 yards away, and 3 cops of Irish extraction leapt out of the car and started running in the direction of the husband and wife, brandishing revolvers. "Stick 'em up!" the cops shouted. "Stick 'em up!" But it was impossible for the husband to obey this order without letting go of his wife, and had he done this she would either have fallen to the ground or would have been left dangling half in and half out of the house, which is a terribly uncomfortable position for a woman, so he continued gallantly to push her upward and inward through the window. The cops, all of whom had received medals before for killing robbers, opened fire immediately, and although they were still running, and although the wife in particular was presenting them with a very small target indeed, they succeeded in scoring several direct hits on each body, sufficient anyway to prove fatal in both cases. Thus, when he was no more than 12 days old, little Lexington became an orphan. 2. The news of this killing, for which the 3 policemen subsequently received citations, was eagerly conveyed to all relatives of the deceased couple by newspaper reporters, and the next morning the closest of these relatives, as well as a couple of undertakers, 3 lawyers, and a priest, climbed into taxis and set out for the house with the broken window. They assembled in the living room, men and women both, and they sat around in a circle on the sofas and armchairs, smoking cigarettes and sipping sherry, and debating what on earth should be done now with the baby upstairs, the orphan, Lexington. It soon became apparent that none of the relatives was particularly keen to assume responsibility for the child, and the discussions and arguments continued all through the day. Everybody declared an enormous, almost an irresistible desire to look after him, and would have done so with the greatest of pleasure were it not for the fact that their apartment was too small, or that they already had 1 baby and couldn't possibly afford another, or that they wouldn't know what to do with the poor little thing when they went abroad in the summer, or that they were getting on in years, which surely would be most unfair to the boy when he grew up, and so on and so forth. They all knew, of course, that the father had been heavily in debt for a long time, and that the house was mortgaged, and that consequently there would be no money at all to go with the child. They were still arguing like mad at 6 in the evening when suddenly, in the middle of it all, an old aunt of the deceased father, her name was Glosspan, swept in from Virginia, and without even removing her hat and coat, not even pausing to sit down, ignoring all offers of a martini, a whiskey, a sherry, she announced firmly to the assembled relatives that she herself intended to take sole charge of the infant boy from then on. What was more, she said, she would assume full financial responsibility on all counts, including education, and everyone else could go back home where they belonged and give their consciences a rest. So saying, she trotted upstairs to the nursery and snatched Lexington from his cradle and swept out of the house with the baby clutched tightly in her arms, while the relatives simply sat and stared and smiled and looked relieved, and McPottle, the nurse, stood stiff with disapproval at the head of the stairs, her lips compressed, her arms folded across her starchy bosom. And thus it was that the infant Lexington, when he was 13 days old, left the city of New York and travelled southward to live with his great-aunt Glosspan in the state of Virginia. 3. Aunt Glosspan was nearly 70 when she became guardian to Lexington, but to look at her you would never have guessed it for 1 minute. She was as sprightly as a woman half her age, with a small, wrinkled,